Reason. This is responsible for wisdom. Those who reason are wise and behave well, and they are the only ones to be leaders in society. You take time and you reason on things before you do them. In other words, you become wise to choose the option of doing this or the other. And to him he is saying, people who have got reasoning capacity or who are wise should be the people whom regard behaving well and who can take responsibility of leading others or leading the society. Then he talks about skills, that this determines those who become artisans. In our societies, we have people who are leaders, who use wisdom and reasoning. They are those who use skills. They are carpenters, they are drivers, they are in business. So he says these become artisans, business people. They have skills to do business, soldiers and others. These have a fair level of good morals. And when he says good, fair level, we can witness from what we see around us. The business people and artisans or even soldiers cannot be completely trusted. They are not all that wise. They have a mind of cheating, corruption, and what. We are not saying that leaders cannot be corrupt, because they can be wise and also have skills which can be corrupted. But these are people who are less reliable in ethics. Then the lower level of the pyramid, defined appetite. Those who only care about themselves, about their appetites, e.g. food, appetite for food, appetite for sex, appetite for materials, etc. And when you have an appetite, it is personalized. It is not appetite for others. So these are self-centered people. They are not fit to lead because they lack wisdom. They see themselves above others. So such a people, even when we are engaging in politics or choice of leaders in office, we must be careful the person we choose, because if the person has high appetite for a number of things, then that one will be selfish, self-centered, and will never serve the purpose of the society. This brings us to look at a man called Aristotle, another of the Greek philosophers who lived between 384 and 322 BC. He was a disciple of Plato. You can see now, Plato was a disciple of Socrates. Now, Aristotle is a student of Plato. So they are having something in common, but they may not necessarily agree with each other. So he was a disciple of Plato. He argued that reality was brought about by principles. And in this he says the first principle and the final principle, the beginning and the end. And in the middle we know that there is something that takes place that will bring you to the final. Like some people say that the rules of the game apply. So you begin, then the rules of the game apply until you come to the final principle. How do you finish? So the first principle refers to the initial cause that brings something into being. If I begin by saying that the way how you started, by the way, now you are in university, your end may come when you finish and be employed. But the beginning of being here is when you came to school, if we are talking about academics. That was the beginning. Then the principle is that the rules of the game applied between P1 and where you will get a job. So to him he is saying, God, for example, is the one who brought everything into being. He is the first principle. And the final principle refers to the reason why something exists. Like we would say, why are you studying? When you begin working, that's when you will know the value of your education. In between there, you don't know why education is value for you. But when you finish and you begin working, you are employed, you have a family, that's when you realize that what you were doing all this time has brought you to achieve your purpose. So, what it is meant to fulfill, your education, what does it mean to fulfill? That is the final principle. So from the final principle, he developed the theory of teleological ethics. Telos meaning the end. If something or someone does not fulfill the reason why he exists, then that life is not virtuous or is not ethical. You can't imagine if you study from P1 up to university, you graduate and you go home and sit. You do nothing. You are not even a social benefit. Then you are wasted. You have not achieved the purpose of your education. So, the final principle of being, for example, a woman is to produce babies. We know that biblically, a woman was given to man for the purpose of removing loneliness, bringing happiness. But then this happiness, when we put it in scientific terms, a woman is the source of the community. She produces children and the community increases in number. If the woman, according to the African setting, does not produce children, then they look for another one who can produce. Meaning that from an African setting, which can fit in this principle, is that when you are married and you are defined, because when you are married, they look at you as a girl, a virgin. When you are married, you become a woman. And to be a woman, or what qualifies you to be a woman, should be producing children. That is the final principle. If she aborts, then it is unethical. If the purpose is to bring life into the world, but then you abort, then that is unethical. That's why people who abort are subjected to legal prostitution. So if we look at lawyers, or we look at medical practitioners, you must understand right away what the end of your professional calling is. Are you a lawyer to defend those who abort? Are you a lawyer to defend those who commit murder? Or are you a doctor who supports abortion? Or who supports ending life through euthanasia? Is that the end of your professional calling? So you need to think through, what is it that you must be doing? Aristotle, to him, virtue or good living is of two types. One, the intellectual virtue, seeking to know truth. Then the moral virtue, doing good to others. The intellectual value comes from being taught by others, like we are learning now. We learn from one another through observation, through hearing, even through experiencing things. How others do them, we learn. Infused knowledge in order to get enlightened. Moral virtue is acquired by habit, which we call ethos. We develop habits by learning from others and by repetitive behavior. A moral virtue is you repeat it over and over in order to have it embedded in you. So to Aristotle, morality is not an inborn ability such as talking. We need training in order to live ethically. That's why when you read through the New Testament, even the Old Testament, we see Moses giving the laws to the people of Israel, and he demands that these laws should be taught. They should be reminded to the people so that they don't forget, because within the laws is where the people would find their ethical life. So they needed to be trained. In the New Testament also, Jesus demands that when we, in his great commandment, or the great commission, he sends the disciples to go disciple others, bring them, and after they have baptized them, converted them, they teach them everything he ordered them or he instructed them to do. So it is not something inborn, and you think that morals will be found in human beings like that. That's why, for example, if it was an inborn principle, value, or virtue, you will not find some people who are gay and those who are not gay, because it would have been an inborn virtue for every human being. But now we adopt it, we learn it through the societies that we live in. Aristotle says on politics something, that politics are about the natural community of a city. In Aristotle's treatise, the aim of the city is not just to prevent injustice or keep economic safety, but rather to allow at least some citizens the possibility to live a good life. That's how he looks at it. Then we look at a man called Aesop, who lived 620 to 564 BC. He was a Greek writer credited with a number of popular fables. Numerous tales appearing under his name were gathered across the centuries and in many languages in a storytelling tradition that continues to this day, which we have seen that it was one way of Africans transmitting knowledge, morality, and the rest of that. In many of the tales, we find animals speak and have human characteristics. And in African setting, we know in many different traditions here, we find some of the stories are represented through animals, through other creatures which are not human, but bringing into a human understanding of how life can be lived. He was described as an ugly slave who by his cleverness acquired freedom, and he became an advisor to kings and city-states. A later tradition dating from the Middle Ages depict Aesop as a black Ethiopian. Combining Christian with philosophical ideas on ethics. So we want to bring the Christian ethics and we combine it with other philosophical ideas borrowed from, for example, the Egyptians, the Greeks, and others. So the emergence of the Roman Catholic Church after the conquest by Emperor Constantine encouraged the emerging of secular ideas with Christian ideas. Because we know this emperor became a Christian, and therefore he infused the two different spheres of beliefs, and he influenced the church with secular ideas. Some Catholic theologians tried to synthesize biblical teaching with Greek philosophy, like Augustine and Aquinas. I can bring this one in the perspective of an intermarriage, for example. If one person comes from the West, for example, an American marries an African, and they bring together their beliefs, their cultures, they infuse together, the outcome will not be American and will not be African. It will be a new way of ethics. So you find that Constantine the Emperor introduced secular ideas into the Christian ideas, bringing something different. However, there were some who refused. The word is not how, but who refused. Who refused this kind of synthesis. Augustine of Hippo, he was coming from North Africa. He was a monk in the Roman Catholic Church and a theologian who was influenced by Plato's philosophy. That is, those who know the good should be the leaders. Which this one may be against Constantinople's time, because why we are saying this is that he is looking at the choice of leaders without regarding whether they are good or bad. But to him he says only those who know good should be leaders. He wrote the book City of God. He divided humans into two categories, orders. Those living according to the city of man, and those according to the city of God. Those who live according to the city of God should be the ones who live in the city, who lead in the city of man. Because those who live in the city of God have, an understanding of good and bad, and they can live by the good that is expected, good morals, and therefore good morals should be the ones overruling other morals, and good morals come from God. So he promoted the idea that church priests know the ethics of the city of God and should therefore be the rulers, which may be, I don't know, but I've been thinking it over, why the Pope is the political leader in this small place called Vatican. Vatican is a small state. He is the head of the church as well as the head of the nation. So for him he thinks, that's why in the early years you find that church leaders, especially the Pope, had a very strong hand in the matters of the state affairs. In Spain, in Portugal, in Italy, and even in France and England, the Pope had a very strong hand on politics. But the issue is, do you agree with Augustine? Do you agree? We always have reasons why we agree with certain ideas and we don't agree with them. So Augustine of Hippo divided humans into two orders. This one we have already seen. We don't need to go back. It has been repeated. He promoted the idea that church priests know the ethics of the seat of God and should therefore lead. Thomas Aquinas is another person. He was a monk and a Catholic theologian who was influenced by Aristotle, unlike Augustine of Hippo, who was influenced by the other. He argued that God is the first principle, the unmoved mover. So men cannot do good without being moved by God through his grace and law. That is Thomas Aquinas. He argued that in order to be ethical, we have to use the word of God plus church traditions. To him, God gives human conduct by law. We have here the divine law that is coming from God, God's law. Eternal law, natural law, human law. Lawyers who deal with law, you need to probe into these 4 areas of law and define each of them and see how it applies. The human law is the one we have put in place. Societies have laws, families have laws, but these human laws cannot exist without focusing on other laws. The natural law is that one that orders the natural world, which we cannot change, which have controlled the world to be as it is. The eternal law is that law which has been given and it comes all the way, or it is related to divine law. It is also here, it helps how we can look at the eternal authority and apply the law for the sake of keeping humanity in relation to the divine. You look at them and see what you can say here, but we can define them here. That eternal law is identical to the mind of God as seen by God himself. The rational order in the universe installed by God as creation, as I said earlier, deals with the creation, things that have been put in place, the sun, the moon, and the rest of that. Natural law is the moral law that is part of eternal law, binding on sovereigns and humans. It's natural to a given genre, such as angels and humans. Natural, etc. Divine law. This is derived from eternal law as it appears historically to humans. Revelation. Divine into the old and the new law. And here the old law, we find commands, conduct externally, reaches humans through their capacity for fear. The law promised earthly rewards, social peace, and its benefits according to the Old Testament. In the New Law, we find commands, internal conduct, reaching humans by the example of divine love, promised as heavenly reward through Jesus Christ. The human law is called positive law. It is made by sovereigns like the kings, the rulers, to supplement natural law. So here we may have human law like tax law, pay taxes, do bulungi bwansi, voluntary work, and many others where you find that we are involved. So the so-called laws, which fall short of what they should be, are not true laws at all, according to Thomas Aquinas. So Thomas defined the four cardinal virtues as prudence, temperance, justice, and fortitude. Prudence. This is the ability to govern and discipline oneself by the use of reason. Temperance. This is the control over excess so that it has many such classes such as abstinence, chastity, modesty, humility, prudence, self-regulation, forgiveness, and mercy. Each of these involves restraining some impulse, such as sexual desire.